Thank you for coming to the Center for Latino Policy Research. My name is Patricia Baquedano Lopez. I'm the chair of the center. It's my great pleasure today to be presenting and hosting a very important roundtable discussion on questions of identity, questions of alterity, questions of belonging, questions of cosmopolitanism. And I'm here welcoming you to the center, but I do so also with my good colleague, Pedro Jose Garcia Sanchez, who is a professor at the University of Paris 10, Nanterre West Nanterre in France. And he and I have been working on a project for now 2 years that brings together researchers from France and Berkeley through an amazing fund called the France Berkeley Fund. And with this project, we have been hosting a series of workshops, and this is one of them. And so, Pedro, you and I are going to be walking us through this introduction and through the activities that we will have for the day. Welcome back to the center. Yeah? So, one of the things that we're going to do is I want to make sure that you have a program. And as you can see, our program, and does everyone have a program? They're at the entrance. It looks like this, and it has a very detailed schedule, which we have already gone over a few minutes, but we will catch up. That's our specialty. We will be catching up. And what we're going to do is that we have organized the program in such a way that we have at least 3 presentations, 3 interventions that are bringing in some conceptual discussions that guide the backbone of the project that we've been working on cosmopolitanism. And we're also going to have 2 groups of presentations of experiences that a group of us has been having in the Mission District of San Francisco. And we've been participating in 2 activities, and this is the 3rd activity of what we've been calling an extended workshop. And on the past weekend, we had been visiting the mission following a major activity that will be the core of the conversations today. And that is the activity of Dia de los Muertos, or Day of the Dead. You realize that happened this past weekend, is that right? Yeah? Lots of miracles and lots of activity going on, that's right. So we were in a mission, and we were working to bring to forth the concepts that we're going to be sharing with you, and also to find ways to experience and interpret our visit to the mission. We also have built in our program time for conversation, time for discussion, and I think that that's always the most important thing for us, to have questions and generate dialogue as to how these concepts are mapping onto the experiences that we are bringing in through the various presentations and the expositions that some of the members in the smaller groups will be doing too. Yeah? And so I have here a number of questions here. This is kind of small. I just realized our projector is too small. But yeah, it's fine. But just briefly, our project with the France Berkeley Fund is titled Social and Political Tools of Urban Cosmopolitanism, the Challenge of Otherness in Distributed Cognition and Interactivity. This type of work has been greatly influenced by someone who is in the room, Professor Arnold Sicurel, back there, whose work on trying to help us understand how we come together to cognize socially has been very central in our work, in our conceptualization of this project. We have a complementary interest in urban questions. My colleague Pedro comes from a sociology background. I come from a more linguistic anthropological background that is centered in the field of education. So this complementarity is good for us as we try to make sense of how does one live in a city like San Francisco, or a city like Paris, where Pedro has one of the cities in which he's been working And so, you know, and in trying to find a focal event that brings these different complementarities together has been exciting here through the event of the Day of the Dead. So, because it brings together, right, an important, the circulation of a globalizing phenomenon, right? That this event of Day of the Dead is happening in San Francisco, right? Which has a long history throughout Latin America, and in particular in certain parts of Mexico. It's remarkable, right? It brings together also to the city, to the mission, brings people from all over the Bay Area, right? But it also brings people from extended parts of California and beyond, right? So it is a transnational event as well. It definitely is about temporalities that come together and are experienced differently, right, by people in the mission. It's about memory, because the event is about remembering the dead. But how this is done, right, in the city will be different. And that's what we'll be doing in the past weekend, is tracing, mapping, and reflecting on the different ways this event is taken up by the people of the mission. Pedro, do you want to add something to this? Yeah?
Well, first will be thank you very much for all of you, especially Patricia Baquedano Lopez and all her team, and the students and the professor, and also Aaron Sicurel. As Patricia said, it's somebody quite important for us in the inspiration of theoretical and methodological tools which we used to work. And also, excuse me, because I'm not going to continue to speak in English, because as you realize, I have a very little English. Then I'm going to speak in Spanish.
And we have Sylvia Molali, right, translating for us professionally, so we're very appreciative of your presence.
Thank you for having me.
Okay. ¿Dónde estoy aquí? Ya me sé. No, ninguno de esos. Ahí. Eso.
Got it. So we go into the center tools.
Ok, como Patricia lo señaló, estamos casi al final de un programa en el que hemos venido trabajando desde hace 2 años, gracias al Franz Berkeley Fund y al trabajo conjunto que hemos estado haciendo desde el laboratorio en el que trabaja Patricia, aquí en educación y en el Centro for Latino Policy Research, en el laboratorio en el que yo trabajo en París, que es un laboratorio que se llama Mosaico, y que es un laboratorio que trabaja interdisciplinario, que trabaja sobre las cuestiones urbanas. Y digamos, simplemente quería decirles hasta qué punto el primer encuentro que tuvimos en París en el mes de abril fue significativo para de algún modo decir hasta qué punto esa cooperación que estamos tratando de establecer, a la vez institucional, pero también disciplinaria y también metodológica, es importante, y cómo en París tratamos de darle un sentido. ¿Me paro y te traduce o cómo hacemos?
Si usted quiere.
Sí.
Como,
Sería bien.
ya, solo que va a tener que ser un poquito más.
Sí, corto, lo voy a hacer corto, no te preocupes.
Okay. So, and please, if there are gaps, you let me fill in. So let's see if I can go back to the theoretical and method, no. Okay, this is the end of a 2-year project that Patricia and Leandro have been working on. I'm sorry. Thank you to the Berkeley Fund. It is a laboratory of, that includes the educational department, the Center for Latino Research Policy, Mosaicos in Paris at the University
Nanterre.
Nanterre. And, okay, April 1st of this year, there was a meeting in which cooperation, they were trying to establish the cooperation, or rather the coordination between the sociological, the linguistic, and the methodological. And to give it meaning, to give all of this meaning.
Ok, y simplemente quería señalarle, en París trabajamos en 4 mediodías, y en esos 4 mediodías que reagrupamos a través de este título, pragmáticas del cosmopolitismo urbano, a través de su puesta a prueba, a través de sus recursos y a través de su interactividad, tratamos a la vez de desarrollar actividades prácticas que nos permitieran ponernos un poco en el ambiente y escuchar lo que nuestros colegas de Berkeley aquí presentes, Patricia, Gabriela y Rocío, que vinieron, podían presentar de la investigación absolutamente interesante que están haciendo en San Francisco, una escuela con los niños y todo el proceso de aprendizaje, de integración, mexicanos, yucatecos, que pasan por la cultura maya y que nos ponen ya de entrada frente a la cuestión propia del cosmopolitismo. Es decir, ¿qué hacemos cuando simplemente somos diferentes y nos encontramos en un mismo sitio y tenemos que coexistir en ese sitio? De alguna manera que no sea dándonos golpes, que no sea agrediéndonos, que no sea haciendo lo necesario para negar la existencia del otro.
So this is the pragmatics of urban cosmopolitanism, and so we are looking at the resources, the development of practical activities, and so we are listening, working in collaboration, listening to our colleagues here at the center, Patricia, Rocio, you mentioned another name. Gabriela. And the work that they are carrying out with children and with their studies and their research. And we're looking at the Mexican culture and the Yucatecan culture, the Mayan culture, and cosmopolitanism. And essentially, what do we do in a situation when we're all different, all very diverse, and how can we coexist so that we get along well and not knock each other on the head?
Ok, entonces, simplemente les digo los títulos de las 4 mediodías en los que trabajamos. El primero, bueno, un gentío, mucha gente, muchos mundos, en las ciudades mundos. Así fue como abrimos el workshop. Luego, en la tarde, trabajamos sobre lo que llamamos umbrales sensibles, algo sobre lo que vamos a volver justamente porque lo trabajamos en la experiencia de este fin de semana pasado en San Francisco. Luego, la alteridad interactiva del citadino, porque justamente de eso se trata. Un citadino es aquel que tiene que hacer más que otros con los que son diferentes, ¿ok? Y finalmente, un aspecto más político, cómo la democracia urbana, cómo la ciudadanía urbana se pone en funcionamiento, y ese es un aspecto cosmopolítico, está en la palabra también, cosmopolitano, pero también cosmopolítico, que fue central en el trabajo en París y Nanterre.
So we are working in these 4 channels for roads. And the first is to work with a multitude of people, lots and lots of people, and that was the first workshop that focused on that. The second one was umbrales sencillos, simple,
Free hall.
free.
Hall.
The third is the alteridad interactivo del citadino. Okay, so the interactive alterity of the citizen, of a citizen, okay, of the people. Then the political aspect, the urban politicism, the cosmopolitic as well as the cosmopolitan.
Ok, y como último elemento, simplemente lo que hicimos este fin de semana y sobre lo que ya habló, introdujo el tema Patricia, y simplemente esos aspectos que están acá. Cómo identificarnos en un espacio, cómo trazar o identificar cómo la gente traza recorridos en un espacio, cómo reflexionar acerca de eso. Entonces tuvimos como una atención particular hacia lo socioespacial y qué es visible, pero al mismo tiempo cuando estamos viendo algo siempre qué podemos pensar que estamos dejando de ver, porque ustedes saben, la luz enfoca algo y hay una sombra. Luego lo mismo hicimos con todos los otros sentidos. ¿Qué escuchamos? Y en lo que escuchamos, ¿qué hace, qué tiene sentido para nosotros a través del feeling o a través de la racionalidad? Y luego, de lo que escuchamos, ¿qué se hace ruido? Lo mismo con el tacto, lo mismo con el gusto, a quién tocamos, quién nos toca, cómo se hace esa cuestión de frotamiento propio a la ciudad. Entonces, dicho esto, paso la palabra a Patricia, quien va a presentarnos entonces la primera reflexión sobre este trabajo.
Gracias, Pedro. Gracias, Pedro. No sé si conocen y saben un poco sobre los dos espacios que estuvimos visitando este fin de semana, simplemente en lo que regreso aquí a esta pequeña introducción. Me gustaría que vieran conmigo los dos principales espacios. Bueno, estamos aquí hablando sobre, déjenme buscar aquí está mejor, ¿verdad? La misión, todo está en San Francisco. Yo sé que quizá no han visitado mucho, pero sí todos han ido alguna vez. ¿Sí? ¿Hay alguien aquí de la misión que vive en la misión? Bien, reconocerás algunos de los espacios. Este sería el mapa donde está localizada la misión. Tenemos aquí el proyecto, uno de los proyectos que organiza el Festival del Día de los Muertos cada año. So that's the project that organizes the festivities every year, right? And it's I forget the name, the Marigold Project, that's what it's called. Right, and so this is from their website, and it's very interesting. At the last point, creating a public space for community members to honor the loss of loved ones in their lives and to connect with one another through art and expression of the timeless subject of death and dying. So that's like one of the goals. It's interesting how this is organized, and we'll see throughout the morning how there are snapshots of this event. And also, Presita I muralist, we took also as an introduction to the mission in the art of the mission, a mural tour. And so just for you to note that this is the site that we visited, and you can look them up and read what this mural project does. But it's what it's trying to do is bring back. It has a lot of I'll just read one sentence here. It says, Presita I's Muralist Association seeks to enrich and beautify urban environments and educate communities locally and internationally about the process and the history of public community mural art, right? So here we have again words like public, urban, right? And so these will be circulating in our talks today. I'm going to exit out of this because I just wanted to highlight the two, and I guess that's us, various different sets. I also want to point out that a very good thing we had in our team, two very young researchers with us, and their art is there, their collection of their snapshots that they took, and we thought that children often, bring perspectives not always included in the conversations of spaces like this. So if you get a chance later on to take a look at the perspectives from young children. They are at school today, so they couldn't come to be with us, right? All right, so let me transition into a different PowerPoint here real quick. And this is what I want to talk to you about very briefly is, I have titled my contribution today, Encounters on Crossings, and with the idea that there is a type of, there's this, at the core of cosmopolitanism is the idea of mobility and movement. And migration, transnationalism are central components of this experience that we're trying to understand, in particular in the mission. I'm going to probably skip the next, right? Oh, here. Given my training and my understanding of how life, everyday life, right, is the microcosm to understand broader political, broader social issues, my work necessarily goes to the everyday classroom interaction as a laboratory for making sense of experience, and that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to be returning to samples from classroom interaction, time permitting. I'll show you what happens in a classroom when students try to make sense of Day of the Dead. Probably very much like you did when you were younger. Some of you did, right? So definitely, what my work is, we're interested, and I say we plural because I work with my students on this project, and we are very, very aware that at the core of what we do in migration is we have to pay attention to multiple dimensions of migration, right? And that spaces and practices, that there are spaces and practices of migration and movement that are embedded in almost every single act, right, that occurs in the public space of the mission. Our work also takes us to document and interpret, right, the materiality of discursive practices of migration. And by that we mean the kinds of the discourse practice, but the language, the writings, the forms of art, the significations, right, that become material of this process, right, that is temporally fluid, right, that is spatially fluid. But yet there are material forms that document presence, that document encounters, that document crossings. And so we're interested in on our focus on cosmopolitanism to pay attention to this aspect of materiality, the materiality of discursive practices. And it's something that increasingly, and with other migration movements, we've seen this dynamic between visibility and invisibility as strategies to engage and navigate the city. We have seen this as strategies to navigate other aspects of migration, for example, documented status, right? We have had a tremendous shift, a social movement that has become open about status, citizenship status, for example. It's no longer a secret, but it is, a reality that must be addressed and worked with, right? Similarly, the dynamics of visibility and invisibility also exist in, are materialized, are realized in urban encounters, in city living, in becoming citizens, not necessarily the status citizen, but as actors, acting on social institutions, right? And that is a very simple example. A community, a group of people may decide to stop being invisible to the eyes of social institutions, the police, to other social groups, to other immigrants, for example. And so we have the processes of community organizations, right? And so the formation of community organizations renders community, right, visible as institutions that then other institutions must engage with, right? And so the visibility of communities, in particular the community that we've been working with, we've worked with Latino communities more generally. In our last project, we've been working with indigenous immigrants from Yucatan. And so that's a community that's grown exponentially in the past 20 years in the mission. And so with it come lots of very interesting and difficult dynamics of becoming a city dweller, an urban dweller, right? If the history of this group of people have been not in urban centers, so migration has done a shift in terms of their mobility and their space, the spaces that they now occupy, right? So we've been very interested in this as well. So another point that you know, I'm bringing in some points that have been of interest to us and related to my last point is that being mindful that when we are paying attention and studying the processes of cosmopolitanism, that we have to understand that it isn't an equalizing sort of conceptual framework, right? That then everyone participates more or less equally, right, in the processes and practices of cosmopolitanism, right? But to remember that there are historical traces to different groups and to different individuals that participate and make urban life possible, right? For the population that we've been interested in, largely Latinos, but also our most recent population of indigenous students from Yucatan, is that industrialization and trades between the United States and Mexico have created what researchers in migration have talked about as the collapse of the peasantry, right? That there's no longer land to work with, and that people are forced, they are displaced. We have had recent events at the border with young children, right, traveling on their own because of similar conditions, right? Very little still talk about, we're not talking about this enough, but in terms of how migration and out-migration and forced displacement is tied to very strong politics related to drug trafficking, right? And drug, related economies, right? So like that is something that influences and shapes like the experiences in the city. I don't know how we're doing in time, but I should just finish real quick. So let me just skip a couple of examples here because I want to go back to let me see, a bit of work that I did before. We are in the mission working with a school, and this school we're still collecting data. It's an ongoing process, right, of an ethnographic orientation. And so for today, I thought that I will start with, and maybe given due time, just focus on a lesson on one of the research projects that I did a few years ago in the context of the church. And I consider it very relevant because part of our work has been to look at ritual and altarizing, making something, religious and ritual, right? And so this is a class for young children, and maybe some of you did this before also when you were growing up, which is to attend religious education classes for Spanish-speaking children. It's like a catechism in a Catholic church, right? But the classes are in Spanish in English churches. And so it's a very interesting setting. And very briefly, I'm going to show one, I'm going to show a transcript. We work with transcripts, with language data. So I'm going to read this to you. This teacher, on this day, is November the 2nd. November the 2nd is the day, right? The day of the day, right? And class starts with this comment. Right? Class starts like this. Oops, let me skip because I already said this. The teacher says, right? I'm going to read it in Spanish. Is that going to be okay? And then you can see the English translation there. Sylvia's going to be fine. The teacher says, Nosotros hoy tenemos la celebración de aquí, tenemos la celebración de very teacher-like, right? This move, right? It's asking the students to contribute, right? El Día de los Muertos, yeah, they all knew it, right? Del Día de los Muertos, Del Día de los Difuntos, says the teacher, right? The day of the deceased, right? And she just immediately says, ¿quién puso altar en su casa? And then, you know, hands went up. A student, and while they're saying this, you can almost hear in la escuela, right? Yo lo hice en mi escuela, says a student, right? And the teacher goes, escuela, right? Pointing out to the children what done the altar at home, at school, right? So you can see here the contrast, right? A practice of the home is now a practice of the school, and there's a little bit of trouble there, right? And then she goes on to ask, ¿qué le pusieron al altar? Sounds like a test, doesn't it, right? Let's see. Johnny says, yo le puse una calavera y un chile y chips. Chips? Chile, says the teacher, right? Frijoles y arroz porque mi abuelita, y con fotos porque a mi abuelita le gustaba comer eso y flores, right? So you can see how this is, you know, a representation, right? A way to understand Day of the Dead, a way to make sense of this, right? With a lot of other social interaction happening at the same time, right? The teacher goes real quick to show what's on her altar, right? She says, on my altar we put pulque. What's that, says somebody? It's a drink that comes out of maguey. It's like a white milk, but it's wine, right? So then you start seeing the differences, right? And she goes on into this incredible narrative, the teacher. She says, and my grandmother liked pulque, and we put up a pot with turkey and mole, because she liked mole with turkey, and she liked cambalachos, they are like bean tamales, and she liked sugar cane, corn, and pumpkin, right? So what is this teacher doing? A number of things. And I'm just going to suggest a few, and maybe we can talk some more in the discussion, right? She identifies the date and the celebration and who participates in the celebration. Today, hoy, nosotros celebramos, right? So it makes that inclusive to the people there. Valued practices, setting up an altar at home versus at school. Like we can see that the tendency here is to favor the home practice rather than the school institution practice, right? And then describing altar offerings, and in so doing, they're also recalling the departed, right? The grandmother, the two grandmothers in this case, right? And the appropriate cultural items that are part of that celebration. Right? Nothing else. When Johnny says chips, there's a little turbulence, right? But chips, you know, they're actually corn, so I guess we'll be okay with it, right? So I'm going to stop here and that this serves as a kind of introduction to the Day of the Dead, what this looks like in a school setting, and how this is part of a larger, broader setup of Day of the Dead activities across many centers, across many urban centers of the United States and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias a Patricia por esta presentación rica en colores, en expresiones y en reflexiones. Voy a pasar enseguida la palabra a Alain Bataguer, que es investigador del Centro Nacional de Investigaciones Científicas de Francia, quien es sociólogo y antropólogo y que es uno de los grandes especialistas en Francia en el trabajo en sociología de las migraciones. Fue uno de los pioneros en el trabajo en Francia de combinar la reflexión urbana a través de investigaciones de acción con la problemática específicamente migratoria, que como quizás ustedes saben, en Francia es uno de los asuntos públicos que tiene mayor relevancia y crítica y problemas y leyes y reflexiones como las que nos presenta Alain Battery.
Okay, thank you. Just a word of presentation. So my name is Alain Battery, and I'm working in France. I try to develop urban approaches of migration, and especially of migration coming from North Africa, Algerian, Tunisian, Moroccan people, since the 80s. And at the beginning of the 80s, they were quite invisible. And this was not such an important matter in public discourse as it is now. So I want to thank Pedro and to thank Patricia to invited me here and to come to this workshop and to go to, is it? Yeah. And to go to the mission district and have an observations and now have this workshop with you. I'm an outsider. I'm in a triple sense. The first one is I don't know very well San Francisco, and it was the first time I went to Mission District. So this is the first thing. The second thing is my English is not so fluent, and you know, hablo español muy well. So I have a problem with the language, and this is the second one. And the third one is I have no, in my background, I have no Latino experience. So the Day of the Dead, it's not very familiar for me. So this is why I want to present you something with an outsider's point of view. I began with 3 points, which are theoretical and conceptual one, and then I go through 3 observations to have a discussion with you. The main orientation of my speech now is a reflection about urbanizing the approaches of rituals within cosmopolitan situations. So the first question is maybe it is about the notion of and the concept of public. Okay, we can say public spaces, and then there's this is a general category. Then we can say something that to participate to public life, so you can, with that kind of ritual and of procession, this is a participation of public life, not only within public spaces. And then we saw in the project, you show a slide before, they want to create a public space. So this is not a public space is not déjà là, here. You know, you have to create it. So public, it's quite complicated notions. And then we have also another sense of public, which is audiences. And audiences are very important in a cosmopolitan configuration. So this is the point. Public, okay, but not in a singular way, in a singular notion, but a pluralistic notion, a plural notion. So this is the first one. The second one is about rituals. And you know, we have a lot of literature of conceptualization is available about ritual. I don't want what I want to tell, to the point here, is we can see a ritual as a part of a culture, of a group. And at the same time, we can see a ritual as an event. And we can ask what kind of community ritual is performed. The idea is that a ritual is performing a community and not only is the expression of a pre-existent community. So this is another point I want to address. And also the thing that a ritual is could be transformed. And there are transformation, evolution of a ritual. And it's also a frame of action. And then a ritual also aggregates different kind of actions. And maybe within a narrative or something like that, which is quite composite, but at the same time, it can be identified. And the last point is about the notion of perspective. You know, in a cosmopolitan situation, the notion of perspective is very important because, okay, we can say each group has, or each individual has a different perspective when they are seeing or they are participating to an event. But at the same time, we have to take in account that those perspectives are perspectives upon perspectives. I mean, the perspectives of people are to be seen. And then people, this is interactivity, you know, and people are also reacting to the perspectives of others and so on. And perspectives are in process like that. It's not only perspectives, they are from a group or from somebody. He has one, and this is it. And this is perspective upon perspective. So this is it. And we were there that way. And the Marigold project, I just okay. So this was a project, and we begin in the morning like that. And this is important. This is also a ritual. Is something. It is recurrent. How is it? Recurrent.
Recurrent.
Yeah, it is recurrent. So it has an history. It's not only reproduced at the same each year. It has an history, and we have to understand the history of the ritual to understand what are the main evolution. So it is. I just catch something. Then 3 points. Now let's go to the observations. Now I want to develop just 3 points about it. The first is connected with that murals. You say it's a mirror. Murals are a mirror. There is a kind of open space gallery, and in that open space gallery we have this one, and this one you can see it with 2 perspectives. The first is that one, the second is that one. It is the same, you know. But what is said in that is it's dealing with police and the relationship they have with young people. And there's also one, this is police and the newcomers in the area. They are dealing very friendly with police. And this is at the same time. So that means as a mirror, you know. The gentrification, I don't know what is the exact word to specify that, is known by people, is mis en scène. Help me please, mis en scène. Huh?
Puesta en escena.
Puesta en scena, and it is publicly and it is visible, okay? And this is not the privilege of the observer. This is also the experience of the resident. And so this is the first point. The second one is that one, in the same gallery, you know, the same open gallery. This is a new, the same team, in fact. This is a building which was recently reoccupied by people coming from outside, probably with money. So they do that. It just, I mean, colors. They just mean colors like that, just to adjust. You know, they think they adjust to the gallery, just like that. And at the same time, you know, that they hope, I suppose, that there is no murals. They don't choose establishments, etc. So this is also, so this is the way. And, okay. I go, this is the first thing about mural. And the first thing about mural is there is a visibility of the process of newcomers, of changing the district, how the street district is changing, and this is public, all right? Now there is, I go to another observation with this guy. Pedro was there, and we were discussing with him. And he said, for me, I'm just here, it's not an event where I change my dress or I change my look. This is my habit. I'm living like that, you know. And that's quite important as a scene. So we see during the procession, during the D-Day, many people are wearing special clothes and so on, but he knows. So this is another line of tension and of understanding the situation, of living the situation. And he does that. Okay, he did that. The other observation, 2 minutes, okay? The other observation, it's the importance of that. This is respect and no drinking. And this is a very important rule, and which was respected, I mean, during the war event. And I know this kind of thing is very important when we tried in France to process the beginnings, visibility, and you know, manifestation and something like that in the beginning of the 80s. The problem of drinking was very hard, and so this is the fact. This is. Would you help me, please? Comment l'événement tient?
How the event
is tient.
Se sostiene.
Se sostiene, maintains, still remains.
Okay, another point is that one. This is a marchandise. The rituals, some familiar rituals are becoming, you know, a money-making facts like that. And this is problematic, and this is maybe there are here different perspectives. People saying, okay, this is an opportunity to make money, to do that. And other people saying, okay, this is a domestic practice which is now captured, used by people to make money. And this is another kind of perspective and of tension. Okay, and this guy we were discussing with, Gabby, You ask him, are you selling those little things you made? And he say, okay, but not today, not today.
Mhm.
So this is the different interpretation of that. Okay, la muerte de la misión is another topic which is coming in the event, and this is the way that the ritual is enlarged to the neighborhood and to the mission, and this is another kind. I want to finish the same. Our mission, no election. The same with Alex Nieto. There was a block during the procession with Alex Nieto. And this is also a thing I experienced in France with young people, young Algerian people being killed, you know. And we have procession like that, and they have a sign, and they are discussing about it. Also there is a mural which appears about, and which is not in the tour, the artist, but there is one. So I finish with that. The question is, what I saw is something about the public dimension of the event, which is multi-oriented, and which has to deal with some tension, contradictions, different perspectives saying with it. And I think we have to think about public space or public dimension within a cosmopolitan configuration, and in that way we have to think about different things, and nevertheless how such rituals or such events are making sense.
Thank you. Okay, let's get 10 minutes to discuss, okay?
Yeah. That's good. How do we organize this? Maybe there are questions, right, that people might have?
Preguntas, aclaraciones, comentarios,
Commentaries? Comments?
críticas.
Criticism?
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Fernanda. I was just wondering, I couldn't go this weekend to the mission, and I talked to a friend about me wanting to go, and then my friend was like, well, don't expect a lot because it's really gentrified, so it's gonna disappoint you. So I was wondering, like, how did the day look like the people who were there, and how did that impress, like what impression do you have of that?
Okay.
Alan, Patricia,
And maybe others too.
other questions? Okay,
Yeah.
some questions, okay. Some others?
I could say something. I was gonna talk about that in my PowerPoint, but I do feel like it's definitely very gentrified. I do feel like the dynamics of the people participating aren't necessarily what you would expect to see, and also I don't think in that sense it gives it the same seriousness or respect that you would expect.
Hmm.
For myself, I should say.
Thanks, Katerina.
And
Sarah?
and then the other thing too is I wasn't sure how I felt because they commissioned artists to create altars, and I'm not sure how I felt about it, but thinking about it, it kind of like takes away from it because it's so elaborate and it's like very over the top. And when I first got there, I was talking to a guy who's been partaking since 2008, and that he was saying how now people use it as a second Halloween, and so that's what I've been talking about as well. And there's just so much costume, like, of things that don't even relate. Like the man with the rainbow, like, what does that have to do with anything? And
San
it's,
Francisco.
yeah, I know what it has to do with it.
Yeah.
But it was a little disappointing.
Bien.
So I think everyone brought up some issue of visibility and invisibility, and people are bringing up issues about representation. So is it an authentic or not representation? So when Beatriz is talking about how the students in the class bring up, do you build an altar at home? So, you know, my parents are from the north of Mexico. We never built an altar. We never celebrated Day of Dead. So in this sort of urgency in the mission, because of gentrification, all these processes from both the people that are being accused of gentrification to construct some sort of representation of Mexicanidad, Latinidad, they rush to like one particular representation of Mexico, or Latinidad. As you say, you're not familiar with Latino issues, so like what is being constructed and what type of representation is important in all these processes, that there's an urgency to construct it, and it's being constructed by two different, very different publics, if we want to call it that.
Yeah.
It was I like the comparison that Patricia did between this school versus home, and what I see there's a big is that when you talk about gentrification, it's the modification of the religious act by itself, because it's extracted from the origin and have the second way of representation in the city. But I think it is it's not only the gentrification, but it's the use of these how do you call rituals to incorporate different aspects of the daily life.
Causes.
The violence, you know, how they take advantage of this to protest, and not justice, not peace, you know. And then what could be, in my view, is what could be the best way, if it's not using this kind of ritual to really put at front the concern of the whole community for improving their life.
Thanks. Do you want to?
Me say something to this?
Yeah.
Yes, I would love to say things to this, because what Hector brought up and Clara, just the idea of, you know, in this slide in particular, is the, you know, one of our themes in the other paper is what is altar, what's altar, right? And how something every day becomes altarized, becomes the ritual, becomes a ritual, right? And it goes through a process, right? And the conditions, like this is from an anthropological point of view, like the conditions for the ritual to be are there in this event. What do you have as a ritual, as a religious ritual? A procession, you know, a space of adoration, right? The altar, right? A language, right? You have discourses about the dead, you know, and not just in the piece, but in memory of, you know, the kind of language that they use for altars, right? And other symbols, right? And how these are being laminated onto, they're being ritualized as well, right? So that the causes, like the no justice, no peace, or Nieto, or the protest for X or Y, right? They become, right, ritual. They become sacred. That's a sacralization process that's happening for social causes and social reasons, right? And so that's not the first time it happens. in the history. No, I grew up in Mexico, and the first thing we learned was that El Padre Hidalgo, he carried that the banner with Our Lady of Guadalupe. This is like independence. You see, like those processes, right? Cesar Chavez, right? Again, so like there are these religious and how the Catholic Church, as a Catholic Church, institution or vestiges of a Catholic Church. I don't know what that is anymore, right? Like the connection is tenuous, right? They become these platforms, right? The steps, the stepping stones for an altarizing kind of practice. Something like that is like what your thoughts made me think about. I don't know if I addressed any of that, but it's like it's a visibility that takes on, you know, of a different issue, right? In a very visible procession, and you know, everyone's attention, eyes are on the people marching, and they carry those banners, right? It's really interesting. But thank you for the thoughts.
So,
Yeah.
go. But you know, I don't know how to get to the next with that. You know, I selected some sites, and not just issue piece. It's also they have a site also, and this is important for visibility. If we are talking visibility, we have sites also, and this is not the only procession they cooperate or they involve in. There are also 6 months after his death, there was a procession and so on. And so this is also an opportunity. The D-Day is also an opportunity to increase the visibility of the things. But at the same time, this is not the only one. So, and this is similar things with other blocks. We don't talk about music, about some musicians and what, but so this is a conjunction, and I think we have to think about this ritual as a unity, but at the same time we have to think about this ritual as an aggregation of action which has different themes. And I agree with you totally about the constriction of Latino images in such a situation and so on. And that's it.
So just since you brought up the Algerian case, and we have a very multilingual, multicultural panel, in what situations in France do you see the Algerian community coming to protest that you see running parallel to what you saw in the mission?
I mean, there are very different situations in France since, I don't know, 30 years, you know. Young people being killed, this is the main line of action during the 80s, you know. And during the 80s, that I know. I know the you know, the scene. I know the scene, and this was a moment where the increasing visibility, because before, you know, before the 80s, the Algerian people really, and especially the young Algerian people, they were not visible. We say about it when we look at what was written by the social observers at those times. They say it's a zero generation. They speak about the invisibility of this generation, you know, and this is a sequence, moment where that kind of thing is very important to increase visibility. At the same time, we have other kind of rituals which are very different, which are more Ramadan, which are more religious, you know. And this is another way to access to visibility, because they don't, they access to public visibility, but also through the market, you know, because you have, you can find goods which are necessary to celebrate Ramadan now. It was a specific niche, you know, but now you can find in supermarkets. And this is, and it's faster than the public administration and than public schools. For Ramadan, they don't want to know, you know, because they said this is a Republican, and they have a conception of laicity where it doesn't mean anything to, you know. So this is the way.
Thank you very much for all this intervention. Let's continue with the program. And we are going to have some intervention about mapping, tracings, and reflections. I invite first Gabriela Borge, who is a PhD student.
Yes, I'm not in the back of the paper. You cannot say anything
But
about me.
I can say that Gabriela is working in his PhD directly in the work about the Maya school with Yucateca people, and I'm going to give you the word to speak with us.
Thank you. I'm going first to open what I'm going to be using, which is a different way to approach information. But since I'm, oh, it's not right here, huh? Okay. Since I'm not, I'm going to mainly let you into my little world of photos. That's
relaxing world.
It's a relaxing world. Because here I just uploaded some of the pictures I want to talk about. And so we will go through them. And well, nice to meet you. My name is Gabriela Borge. I'm a third-year student at the Graduate School of Education. And since 1.5 years ago, I've been participating with Dr. Patricia Baquedano Lopez at her research project in the mission. So this is the second time I was able to witness the Day of the Dead at the mission. The first time was when I just was unpacking my suitcase here at Berkeley 2 years ago. And I had the same sensation that you were mentioning, that of gentrification, that of an incorrect appropriation of the practices done in Mexico. But I have had that experience in Mexico as well, in a different context, where, for example, at a private park in the state of Quintana Roo, which is built by a private company called Xcaret, they've been doing the Day of the Dead celebration for 5 years, bringing in communities from the Yucatan Peninsula to share their traditions. But also, they have been painting their bodies, which was like the first time I saw it in Mexico. I was like, what is this? Why is this being done? Because the practice didn't entail painting your face as a sugar skull. So how the sugar skull, and we are tracing, no? How did the sugar skull ended up in the face of people and in a large procession in the mission? So that is the guiding question of my presentation today. And when we were about to leave the mission, I took this book from a pile They were there and they said, like, why is she buying a book 2 seconds before we are leaving? I don't know, but the ambience called me to take this book. And as soon as I opened it, I saw these pictures. Okay? So I wonder what they were, because I'm not related, nor I know anything about North American Indian cultures. But these are the pictures of clowns of Hopi people. And linguistic anthropologists have had a crush with the Hopi people. So I read the book. I'm going to read some of the fragments that I collected from the clowns of the Hopi people. So they say that the Hopi people will engage in solemn processions. And that is the way the Latinas will have force. Every visitor to Hopi land has a favorite story describing this type of impersonations. They are disquieting because they are the antithesis of the ideal Hopi. Their polysemous nature makes them so fascinating and so difficult to interpret simply. They express so many meanings that almost anything we can say about them can be negated with a contrary or equally valid in convention. And when they are in a solemn procession, when they are in a ceremonial choral, as the way we experience people in the mission walking together. So, for example, when I took this picture and when I saw the image of the that I already showed you, I was impressed by the resemblance. So I'm trying to make bridges. So these people are not heroes, but underside figures, not egos. But in the case of the mission, they are not egos, but a collective id. They reveal the subliminal human nature. They offer a release from this ambiguous aspect of human personality by exposing in it a controlled ritual setting. They dramatically illustrate the briding of human and death. And why death? We saw many signs. This is against the plaza that is going to be built, and hopefully not, on the 16th Street. This is about the mission not being so gentrified. This was the procession took place 2 days before the election. So it also has a direct impact and relation to this cosmopolitical. It is a cosmopolitical act. But here I want to point out, why do people dress as dead to confront these issues? Because these are issues of death. This is the way they are perceiving their neighborhood dying. So they engage with death in a procession to have this force. And in that sense, my experience in the mission this year, even though I saw some of also in the Hopi people, there are some called Hopi clowns, and there were some in the procession, but they were there to make the unreal more visible. That's my contribution.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Gabriela. And I invite Teresa Buppelstone who is a doctoral student in the Literacy, Language and Culture program of UC Berkeley Graduate School of Education, and her research interests include the social and linguistic construction of race and witnesses, feminist decolonial theory and praxis, and the role of schooling within liberal modernity. Please.
I'm really excited that we are here today. I want to thank Professor Rafael Lopez, Pedro, and Alan. It's really wonderful to have this experience with you, and everyone else who participated in the invitation for my son to come in now, for Latinos, Latinas, and education, everyone to be here, and to think about these ideas together, and to kind of experience class today in a different format. I think is really wonderful. So I'm starting with this image because my son came with us on Saturday to see the murals, and this picture is one that he spent a lot of time talking to me about because he came with his 5th grade class to the murals a few years prior to our visit on Saturday, and so he really wanted to kind of point out to me and show me his understanding of what this mural is saying. He wanted to point out the Starbucks cups and the movers, new residents moving in, and he pointed out this police figure with the woman here who has a bag that has some version of Whole Foods and Trader Joe's and some other corporate companies there. And I really appreciated his insights and his opportunity to learn and think about these ideas here. And Dia de los Muertos isn't something that I either grew up celebrating in my family for a variety of reasons. And it actually became something that I first really saw in schools. And so your description of it and the where is it appropriate and where is it most honored is really an interesting question to me. And it's interesting because in the Berkeley, in the most recent issue, there is a piece on the art display of the Dia de los Muertos. And there's a former professor who is quoted as saying that this is a cultural phenomenon, and it isn't political and it isn't social. I'm not sure where how these ideas were incorporated. If they're something taken out of context, or I'm not sure. But it made me think about the way that so often the celebrations of Dia de los Muertos in schools, at least in the settings that I've seen, do become very depoliticized. And they do become kind of like, oh, this is Mexican culture, this is nice, isn't it wonderful, we have Mexican or Latino students here, and they're very much depoliticized. There isn't a sense of, as if you don't mind me sharing, this sense of the hiddenness that you spoke about in the practices when they were banned in Mexico in the 60s, and the ways that continuing to celebrate and that connection to indigeneity became important. And so when the practices are revived, how are they revived? And when we bring them into our schools, what does it mean to have them in the schools? And does it locate culture as something that can be put into a box and on display and then packed away for another year? Or is it something that we can continue to live and to be daily? So let's see. So continuing with this idea of gentrification, this is, so there's an interesting contrast between the ideas of the murals from the Recita Aiza's authorized by that group. And then this is something that's found on the sidewalk, and it might be hard to see, but it says the new mission, hot yet edgy, tenants here forced out. And so there are some of these stencil arts on the sidewalk in different places as we walked, and so this is one that I saw. And so I bring this up because I wanted to talk about the ways that the issues, the political issues of the mission at the time changed the shape of the celebration of Dia de los Muertos. And we passed by, this is the corner of Bryant and 24th, I think as they were finishing putting it up. As Alan pointed out, this is something that was put up for Dia de los Muertos, and it wasn't part of the tour, but it became a statement for those who came to view and to think about. And this is only one of the ways that this became part of the celebration this year. And so I want to talk about the gentrification here, the ways that it's been discussed within the community, and these are from online resources. But I think they're really important to think about. Erin McElroy, who is part of the Anti-Eviction Mapping Project, which is a really interesting project that's mapping deaths by police throughout the city of San Francisco, said we are losing people due to evictions, and we are being replaced by people who are scared of us. And very much making the connection between gentrification and death, which is what many have made the case for in the case of Alex Nieto. Gentrification killed Alex. Everyone in the meeting knew this. And this is Tiny Garcia of the Poor News Network, and she points out that this is a meeting that the police sponsored shortly after Alex was killed, and in this meeting there's a community knowing. There's a sense that even though this isn't official knowledge, even though this isn't something that is authorized, this is something the community has made that connection and is honoring him as someone who has died because of gentrification. So the practices very much have that political tone, and they are politicized. They are, the political is altered and outside. And these are his parents, and this is a display at the Latino Cultural Arts Center. So the last thing I wanted to point out is, and perhaps just ask the question because it left me wondering, because I didn't grow up celebrating Dia de los Muertos, but it made me question the ways that the gentrification and death that is happening in the mission, how has that changed the way that death is perceived within the celebration? Is death still something, as Cisneros, in a piece that we read with class, something where we have spirit allies and we welcome that connection to the other side? Is that still how we perceive it in this particular celebration of Dia de los Muertos? Or is it something still that we are mourning and grappling with? And what does our relationship become when we're thinking about death in this way? So.
Okay. I invite Catalina Monteon to come to speak with us. Catalina Monteon is a senior undergraduate student pursuing her BA in English and double major in ethnic studies. She transferred to Berkeley in the spring of 2013.
Oh, yes, 2013.
From Cerritos College, where she graduated with honor, earning an AA in English and double major with an AA in liberal arts and science, culture and society. Catalina is currently working on 2 research projects and is in the process of applying to law school.
Catalina. Thank you, Patricia, Pedro, Alan, Gabi, everybody, Teresa, who I got to meet this weekend. It was a great experience going down to the mission. I've been there before, but I've been there on a different context. So going there as, and looking into the community as a researcher gave me a different view also. So I just wanted to talk about mapping, tracing, and reflecting. I'm going to reiterate a few of the things that my colleagues have already said, just because we have some of the same shared views, and I think I share a lot of them with Ellen, and I didn't know this until looking at his presentation. So the first thing I want to talk about is I mapped out where the procession took place. So this was like where it started, and then that was the procession, and then this is where the altares were, and that's like basically in the heart of the mission. And so one thing I noticed that's how the mission promoted the event. So I noticed that it said San Francisco, so I was wondering if there was any connotation to excluding the word mission, or what the event title meant with not including the mission. Like, what does that mean? Does that include somebody? Does that exclude somebody? Does that open it up for other people to come in? And so also, like, I noticed that the Festival of the Altares was run by Marigold Project, but the altars itself, or the procession, was run by somebody else. And I noticed that there wasn't always like collaboration from what I read of them working together. So I was wondering what kind of tension that brought on, or if that had any issues that we probably were the experience of without even knowing. And so one of my issues was cultural appropriation. And when we were walking, looking at the different altares, I noticed that there was a house that was open, and they turned it into an art studio. So it was basically like the altares. So the park was here where they had all the altares. Across the street was a house that they opened up, and you could just walk in there. Like, it was a young lady who does the art, and her dad were in there. You walk in there, and you could see that she had done all this art. So to me, it was a way for her to just profit and, like, again, make money out of the event. These were like $100. That was like $500. That's like $800. So it's like, who is she? Who is the event? Who is this for? Who can actually afford this? Like, why would she take these symbols, like, that are sacred towards the ritual or sacred towards the event, and turn that into a profitable market? So I thought that was really interesting in how she did that. And she was, this is her house and how she set it up. She was posing for pictures for folks. She was very proud of her work and posing for pictures. And she took this, this symbol of Day of the Dead and put it outside, and then she had her cards here. So she used various aspects of Day of the Dead to promote her studio. So I found that very interesting, how she was able to just incorporate all of this, and to me that was cultural appropriation. So that really stood out in my mind from the weekend. And then the other thing was also the whole thing about gentrification. And so the theme of the whole event was home, centered with the hardest. So I find that title a little bit ironic when we talk about gentrification, because home, centered with the hardest, even if your heart's in the mission, because of gentrification, it may not be there, or it may not have the ability to be there anymore. So I looked at it as like the death of the mission leads to the death of the culture, which leads to the death of the people in the area. So as we know, there's displacement of families there with the wealthier folks moving in. We saw it with with the Google buildings, the Google folks, the Facebook, the Dropbox. We've seen the buses like that actually pick up the people. They stand there waiting in a line to be picked up, which normally you'd expect, or I had associated with day laborers, but instead of day laborers, it's turned into like tech folks, which are mostly in their 30s, white folks, who are waiting for these buses in the mission to come in, take them back to Silicon Valley for their day's work. And the building that Alan showed with the purple, that building, we were told like it's $8,000 to rent for a month. And that's like really exuberant. Like who can actually afford that from the people who are in the mission? So that shows like the culture changes and how the original neighborhood is dying. And it shows like the character distinctions. So that was all like of my thoughts, thinking back to gentrification, how like the mission is dying and like it has this symbol, he like labeled himself mission. And so this image here about how like they fought for it and it's known as a mission and these people fought for it, yet it's being taken away from them. And then should it still become the mission? Does it still deserve that name? Does it still deserve to be a part of this big culture that we know behind it if it's stripped of that? And I also thought that it was interesting how like it says no monster in the mission down here, our mission, no eviction, and it says no monster in the mission. So just the idea of like monsters, death, scary things, and like how people are trying to face them. And I just thought that was really interesting. And I guess I'll end with saying that we were talking about Day of the Dead in one of my classes this week. And I don't know if you know, but Professor Celia Rodriguez, but she puts on the Day of the Dead event here on campus, and she's been doing it for 40 years from my understanding. And so I also worked on Day of the Dead here and set up my own altar. I've been celebrating Day of the Dead as a child growing up, and I've celebrated it here and I've celebrated it in Mexico. So I have like very different aspects of it. And so what Patricia said what Celia said really stuck out to me, because she said, if we don't like what is going on, we need to change it, and we need to change it by being in the center of it and not by watching at the sidelines. And it really struck to me because, yeah, I was angry at some stuff, yeah, I was mad because the procession was about advertisement at times, promoting props, promoting like stuff that wasn't even to do with Day of the Dead, but yet I was on the sidelines. So I can't be that mad if I'm not being as proactive. So that quote just really stuck out to me, and I thought I'd share it with you, so maybe it stirs up something in your minds also. Thank you.
Thank you.
Moving right along, we have our second group of presenters, and they will be addressing in their work how, from their point of view, experience what's sensible, right? What's out there to be experienced. And so, as a first presenter, we have Ana Patricia Martinez Uchin, who was born in Tizimín, Yucatán, Mexico. She's a BA in anthropology, specializing in linguistics and literature from Universidad Autónoma de Yucatán. She is a well-known author. She compiles oral history and is a Maya author and of several stories in single author and edited collections in Maya and Spanish. She is also a teacher of Maya language, which I take in the mission along with Gabi and many others in other classes. So here she is. Please come over here. And this is Sylvia who will teach us the
Con permiso, mucho gusto. Gracias a usted.
Quiero agradecer la invitación a emitir mis expresiones, bueno, mis impresiones del Día de Muertos y el barrio de la Misión.
Thank you so much for this invitation, and I'd like to give my impressions of the Day of the Dead in the Mission District, Mission neighborhood.
Quisiera decir muchas cosas, pero me voy a centrar en la voz maya.
I'd like to say many things, but I'm going to concentrate on the Mayan voice.
La Misión, la calle de la Misión y todo el rumbo, es sabido que viven muchos mayas yucatecos, alrededor de 9,000 personas en esa parte de la ciudad.
It has come to my attention, I've learned that in the Mission, on Mission Street and Mission area, there are 9,000 Mayans living.
Se les escucha en la calle, se escucha la voz maya en la calle, en los restaurantes, en el bar, en el béisbol, en los partidos de béisbol, en el Parque Garfield, en el Parque Dolores. Uno camina y la gente hablando en el celular en maya, en muchos contextos se escucha la voz maya.
So many contexts, many circumstances, you hear people speaking in Mayan, you hear it on the street, you hear it in the restaurants, you hear it in the bars. You hear it in, about baseball, Garfield Park, Dolores Park. In many contexts, you hear people speaking Mayan. In the
Pero
Mission.
en el Día de Muertos no escuché ni una palabra en maya.
The Day of the Dead, I didn't hear even one word in Mayan, spoken in Mayan.
Caminé en las calles, estuve en el Parque Garfield y estuve en la procesión y no vi personas que conozco, que siempre están rondando, que siempre están caminando en este espacio.
I walked the streets, I went to Garfield Park, I went to the procession for the Day of the Dead, and no one was speaking in Mayan, and these are areas that I usually visit.
Y yo me pregunto a qué se debe la ausencia, si sé que está plagado de maya yucatecos, y eso lo pude constatar días antes cuando ganaron los gigantes y salieron los yucatecos a festejar.
Okay, well, I was just asking myself why is there an absence of Yucatecan, Mayan not being spoken?
Vinieron las preguntas y una de ellas es sabido que los maya yucatecos, hablantes de maya o no, cuando llegan a los Estados Unidos, acá a San Francisco, y son católicos y cambian a la religión, pues a otras religiones, a la protestante, a la diversidad de religiones que se ofertan en este lugar, y que si bien la religión católica ha tolerado los rituales agrícolas mayas, las festividades como los rituales al Día de Muertos, los otros grupos religiosos no lo toleran. Entonces yo me pregunto si es por eso que los maya yucatecos no están celebrando el Día de Muertos ni en su casa, no sé si, no me consta, pero que no hicieron evidencia de este ritual de forma pública. Pero sí estaban algunos en la procesión. En las calles, sacando altares, no, ni en el parque, pero sí en la procesión estaban mirando. Ahí sí detecté algunas caras.
I did see some faces, some Mayan faces that I knew in the procession, but other than that, the Mayans, of course, when they arrived to San Francisco, were Catholics, and many have now converted to other religions, and these other religions may not tolerate
Rituales agrícolas,
the agricultural
Día de
rituals
Muertos.
and the Day of the Dead, etc.
Bueno, traje 3 imágenes de las calles, el parque Garfield y la procesión. En las calles muchas flores y la Catrina. La Catrina en Yucatán es el señor muerte, no es una mujer, es un hombre. Eso era muy curioso, pero sé que eso es en el DF, centro de México, norte.
So, yeah, there were lots of flowers, of course, in the streets and these three images, but the Catrín, typically in the capital of Mexico, Mexico DF, is a male figure, and she's
Maya.
in Maya.
Señor muerte.
Oh, el señor muerte.
En el parque Garfield no era una fiesta.
Mr. Death. Mr. Death. Yes.
En el parque Garfield no era una fiesta, era luto, era una demanda por crímenes. Siempre, bueno, vino la comparación en Yucatán, en mi pueblo es fiesta, se recibe al espíritu de los difuntos, comida, plegarias, dulces, música, pero aquí era voz para decir muertes, demandas, denuncias, injusticias, y se podía percibir el dolor, no alegría.
Could really sense the sense of death, injustice, unlike in Yucatan where it is a celebration and we have food and music, and it was the celebration at Garfield Park was in mourning. People were in mourning and making the demands for the crimes that have been committed and the injustices.
En la procesión en la calle 24, cuando los disfrazados, la muerte, la fiesta, donde sí detecté a algunos yucatecos mirando, no participando en la procesión, y un poco ya más fiesta, y me llamó la atención, no vi gente tomando, como en las otras veces cuando sale la gente a las calles y toman mucho, aquí era tranquilo. Y esto me pareció un poquito ya más, en Yucatán se ha tomado también el Día de Muertos para salir a la calle a hacer fiesta, ¿no? Cuando sabemos que el ritual también es muy del ámbito familiar, muy de la casa. Y quiero cerrar con un comentario. En el horóscopo maya estamos en el centro y tenemos 4 nahuales. Uno de mis nahuales es la muerte, lo tengo a un lado. Y coincidió que este señor, lo saludé y me saludó la muerte, pero es mi padrino. Y me dijo, porque hasta dijo, cuídate. Yo estaba, Gracias.
One of her animals, she has the nahual is the animal. I need to be corrected.
Protector.
No, de los,
Protector.
El protector. One of her, spiritual protectors is death, and so she established contact. She looked at somebody who was dressed as death, and they
had a little exchange.
They had a little exchange.
And the last one was, be careful. Well, take care, right, take care. Thank you very much. Our next speaker to share some of her impressions of the Day of the Dead, is Sara Costa, who's a 4th year undergraduate student studying psychology and education. She's from Los Angeles, where she hopes to return to contribute to the uplifting of minority communities. And she's a student in Ed 188. Yeah.
I don't have a PowerPoint for you guys because I don't have a camera, so that would be the most fun that I would have had. But I wanted to start by describing one of the moments that like really stuck out to me, and it was the smell of sage. Like it was everywhere, and
I loved it. Like, I love sage, so I could smell it. So imagine just smelling it the whole day, because that's where we were. And then it got to like be, like, you know, the sun had set and everything, so it was dark. And so I was walking to go and meet with the group, and I heard somebody say, "Oh, I smell sage. That means that drugs can't be very far." And so then I was just thinking about that. I was so shocked, and I was looking around and I couldn't find who it was who said that. And it made me so sad because I think sage was like the highlight of my entire time there, because that like takes me back. Anyway, so then I started thinking about it now, after hearing everyone talk and thinking about gentrification and how there were so many motives for people being there, how there were so many people with, you know, political things to say in the procession, or how people were using it as a time to mourn rather than like a celebration to honor people. And then I was thinking about, what does this like do to the celebration? And in terms of us being the participants, what happens when our motives have changed as well? So like the vendor who was selling the shirts that had, you know, the skull with the giant's hat, and it was Dia de los Gigantes, and like, what does that do when we start to change what this means and we're participating in this gentrification and cultural appropriation? And so I was wondering if like, and this is like actually up for discussion if you guys want, because I don't have very much prepared for it. But is building these bridges, is that taking away from what was? Is making it public taking away rather than like inviting people to celebrate with us?
Questions? We'll address this shortly. Our next presenter is Rocio Aguilar Pedrosa, who is a recent UC Berkeley alumna. She studied social welfare and is currently a master's student in the counseling program at San Francisco State University. Her interests cover issues of migration and the impact of higher education access, and she is the center's very own events coordinator. So here she is, Rocio.
So I actually did not attend the procession. I had a lot of other things that I needed to get done, but I was able to go and look at the murals with the group. And for me, what stood out is what I was seeing, but also not just on the murals themselves, but also within the community. And so going back to that, the senses and the space itself. So from the very beginning, the very first image that we were shown was this image. And it is tying back our culture, and it's making that bridge from what is the past and the present, the there to the now. This image here stood out to me because it's reminiscing back on a community that was left behind. And then I'm going to bring it into this letter, so it's this nostalgia of what was there, what was left behind. But also it's bringing it back to reality and what migration, immigration issues bring up for everyone. And so I'm going to read this letter to you. So it says, mi amor, espero cuando recibas esta carta te encuentres muy bien junto a nuestro hijo. Todavía estoy aquí en California trabajando. Yo sé que la vida ya es muy dura, pero creo que es más difícil aquí por la distancia que nos separa. Los he extrañado mucho y ojalá que podamos estar juntos de nuevo muy pronto. Con mucho amor, Chepe. So this is a letter that is written by someone that has migrated to California, is writing back to his wife, who has left his wife behind with his young son, and is saying that he understands that it's difficult in that country, so we're bringing those issues of displacement within those communities, but also saying that it's hard there because he's separated from them. So the difficulties of having migrated over, it's not all this, like the American dream, it's not all perfect. And then wanting to be reunited, but the difficulty in being able to do that. And so another thing that stood out to me from the murals was how the use of art brings out all the controversies that are being seen within these communities. In particular, and I know everyone's spoken about gentrification, but this image here stood out to me because you see these buildings and it's almost like they're an entity in themselves. It's a robot building. And within the image, if you look up to the top image on your right, there's words like, "We don't care about you." On the newspapers, there says lies, more lies. In the tattoo parlor, it says class of snobbery. Below, you see this building has actually prevented the building of condos. And so then there's someone that's crushed, who was obviously someone coming in to build another condo. And from the cell phone, it says, "Preston, when are we building those condos?" And so then again, this is an image that was shown also, but it's a little bit zoomed into it. And on your left, you see an image of a white family moving in. And in the actual for sale sign, it says, "Call Rich White Realty, liveintrendyhood.com." So for the price of $51 million, so who can afford that? And on the other side, you see a family of color moving out with an eviction notice in the same window. And so then I decided to do a little bit of research. If you go to the census.gov, they group a lot of the communities by blocks. And so I targeted the community that surrounds Balmy Alley, which is where a lot of these murals are. And from 2010, there was, and this is an area that's not very big, so it's from 23rd Street to Cesar Chavez Street, and from South Van Ness to Harrison. There are 4,640 people, and of those, 2,789 are Hispanic or Latino, and 1,851 do not identify as Hispanic or Latino. But then this is again before the tech industry has moved in, so I'm curious to see where those numbers have gone since then. And finally, I leave you with this image here. It's an image of the 99%, and it says, "Aquí estamos y no nos vamos." So here we are and we're not leaving. And my question that I pose to you is, if that is even possible. Like, can these communities stay the way that they are? Can they hold on when other people are coming in and pushing them out? And where will they end up? Thank you.
Lots of thoughts for reflection. I want us to take a couple of minutes. I give some time to respond to these amazing presentations that make us think a lot about issues coming from different perspectives. Would anybody like to make a comment or ask a question or ask for clarification? Was there anything that stuck to you, or that you have a question or a concern? Yes, please.
So I was thinking about the words that you used to frame the whole discussion, which is alter and alter. And it was it was a great reflection on how things become alterized even when they're political. But I was also wondering where if you could explain more or anyone about alter, the relevance of that word and whether it is like how these traditions are becoming alter even to us that have been celebrating it, or where it exactly is like when you look for things.
Any thoughts? Would they like to?
I want to ask. Now, about your reflections about the red as a perception in this celebration, but more related with the phenomenon of gentrification. How these different people feeling this movement of people and mobility also thoughts and different ideas to around the area.
If I can tag along, that is about alter too. So we put those two together. Yeah.
I think the idea of alter is helpful in that sense, and I think that that's both the question that I ended with, and then also the point that Patricia made in her presentation, the comparison between the celebration that she's experienced in Yucatan as opposed to, and it being celebration and more of a joyous feeling, if I understood correctly, whereas here there was much more the mourning and, as she pointed out, the demands for justice. And I thought about Alex Nieto because he talks about, because he represents this intersection between gentrification and what Dia de los Muertos is as of death and those where they come together. And that's a particular iteration of the way that death is being seen and addressed in this instance of and locale of Dia de los Muertos. But I was actually led to think about him because of another one of the images in Altares in the park, in Garfield Park, and that was of a young man who was 14 and actually killed by another resident and a former classmate. And that death, as actually Gabriela and Pedro and I talked about, wasn't one that was directly authorized by the state as the 43, the disappearance in Mexico. You can see like a direct connection. But the long-term violence in communities of color between people of color is something that, and that image of death is something that, even though it's not authorized by the state directly, it's still, in a sense, authorized death that continues and isn't tragic. It doesn't become tragedy, and kind of remains as just a naturalized existence. So I don't know if I addressed that enough, but I hope.
Is there another thought, comment, question? Yes?
I have more of a comment about the last presentation where she asked if we can hold on. I don't know if we can hold on, but to many Latinos that don't live in the mission anymore, I think it's important that we do, because to many of us, even though we don't live there, the mission is, I get a little emotional, but it's our connection home. I came here and the mission was my first home. And to many, they can't go back home for legal reasons or because they're scared of the violence in their country. So I think it's important that we do hold on, because without, to many of us, if we lose it, if our connection will be lost.
important thought. I think this is something that, it's underneath the kinds of, underlying the observations we did, but those bridges, where is home, right? Like the different meanings of home, right? And the importance of preserving home. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, so let me shift here because I'm mindful of time, and I don't want our conversations to stop. I know that many of you will continue in Teresa's class, so that is very exciting. But also come visit us and come talk to us some more about your thoughts and your questions. This is your center, right? This is like like the mission there, but this is like a little something here that we've got too, okay? So, it is my great pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Pedro. We already spoke before and we already introduced him before, but I just want to say the title of his talk, labeled Atmosphere in Urban Public Spaces, and this is our last presentation for today. He says he's going to be very concise and allow us for maybe one more comment or question at the end. And for that, we're grateful because I know you have a lot of wisdom to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yo quisiera hablarles de esto que está aquí en el título. En ese fin de semana en la misión en San Francisco, para mí fue del mismo modo que lo dijo Alain Bataguer, somos extranjeros de varias maneras, foreigner and a stranger also, pero con algunos elementos de familiaridad, así no sea que porque yo también soy latino. Entonces, para mí es fundamental simplemente conversarles aquí sobre lo que es esa idea de labial atmosphere en urban public space. Lo labil. ¿Por qué tratar de conceptualizar, darle un sentido con las palabras a ese ambiente de esta manera? Porque, como lo dije antes, yo soy antropólogo, sociólogo urbano, y durante mucho tiempo en ciencias sociales el binomio formal e informal sirvió, todavía sirve para identificar cosas. Pero yo pienso que hoy día también nos sirve un poco menos, y en ese sentido, cuando estamos en medios ambientes en los que no sabemos muy bien lo que sucede, pero que tenemos algunos indicios, la idea de la habilidad me parece que nos permite avanzar un poco más hoy día que lo que nos permite distinguir y decir eso es informal y esto es formal. ¿Por qué? Porque justamente la idea de la habilidad nos habla de esa precariedad que de algún modo tenemos y llevamos con nosotros cuando estamos en un sitio que no conocemos. Y eso, perdón.
Stop for a little bit. For the last point.
Sorry.
No, that's okay.
Sorry.
Maybe the last point of
precariousness.
The precariousness. I miss.
And the precariousness of the
lability.
Yeah, I don't know that. Yeah, I'm sorry. The ability to change, or the no.
It's movement. It's change.
It's change.
To be
the liability
is to move, to change, to transform. Yes.
You have here in the dictionary in English
yeah.
the different ways you can go into in chemistry, in technical ways, in emotional ways.
Yes.
Great. Yes.
Okay. ¿Por qué? También, además por lo que dije antes, porque estamos en un urban public spaces. Y lo propio del urban public space es que es allí donde tenemos primero que nada que hacer, que cotejar, que intercambiar con lo que simplemente no conocemos o quien no conocemos. Entonces ya de entrada estamos en esa relación frente al incierto. De allí el interés para mí en visualizar esa noción de la habilidad de una atmósfera lábil, de una atmósfera en la que cambia, en la que el hecho de ser precario o de tener un elemento de precariedad no nos aminora, sino que nos coloca ya en un modo de intercambio que es positivo en relación a lo que está allí. Y en ese sentido, son cosas que hemos estado trabajando en Caracas, hemos estado trabajando también en África, en Ouagadougou, pero que yo sobre todo vi aquí en este fin de semana, en el que, como lo señalaron antes todos los que intervinieron, y pienso en particular la intervención de las dos Patricias que tenemos hoy, ¿qué significa esa cosa de estar en un sitio en el que, uno, está la muerte, dos, esa muerte de algún modo se celebra, con lo que quiere decir celebrar, ¿ok? Tres, esa muerte que se celebra nos pone en una situación emocional ambigua, en la que pasamos o podemos pasar de un estado de recuerdo a un estado de percepción, de un estado de tristeza a un estado de impresión. Es decir, estamos en esa circulación de significados continuos y que es muy diferente de lo que nosotros tenemos cuando pensamos la muerte o vivimos la muerte justamente en sitios en los que, o en momentos o en situaciones, en contextos en los que la muerte es eso, es la muerte, es lo que no tiene más allá en este acá, tiene más allá en otro, y tiene significados que nos hunden en la incertidumbre y no nos hacen compartir la incertidumbre como en el urban public space. Y quizás, déjenme poner a avanzar aquí. Bueno, aquí no tenemos sonido por la poquito. Porque como lo dijimos antes, hay una dimensión propiamente sensible de lo que uno vive allí. Y para mí fue eso que ustedes ven. Papeles que en una parte de los altares eran puestos por gente para inscribir un pensamiento en relación a alguien. Pero era también un viento que pasaba justo en ese momento y que hacía un ruido y que movía las cosas y que de repente nos hacía pensar que podían haber presencias divinas allí, que iban más allá de lo que nosotros podíamos de algún modo racionalizar. Perdón. Pero es esto también. Ustedes lo dijeron. La reivindicación política, pero también social, pero también cultural, pero también personal, y que de algún modo iba a hacer que atenciones individuales o grupales de repente se concentraran y crearan un público más allá de una relación personal con el muerto que nos duele. Esto ya lo montaste, gracias a Teresa. Oh, perdón. Pero fue también el sitio en el que habían rituales que generalmente son rituales íntimos o rituales privados, y que de repente sucedían en público. Y sucedían en público, ¿y qué quiere decir esa cosa de poder hacer cotejar en el mismo momento lo íntimo, lo privado y lo público? Yo no lo pongo como afirmaciones, lo pongo como justamente interrogaciones. Y quizás, en ese sentido, voy ya terminando. Uno de los momentos que para mí fue más significativo fue un momento con un altar, que como ustedes vieron, o los que estuvieron allí o los que lo han visto otras veces, buena parte de los altares convocan esa efusividad que a veces culturizamos, decimos es latina, con mucho color, con mucha presencia, incluso con una cierta exoticidad que hace que hagamos lo necesario para atraer la atención. Pero había un altar que me llamó justamente la atención porque era todo lo contrario de eso. Era una pequeña casa de madera que ustedes no la ven porque yo no le tomé foto, porque yo me quedé por lo menos una media hora estando allí viendo y tratando de encontrar mi sitio. Yo no sabía cuál era mi sitio como público frente a eso, frente a lo que estaba viendo, frente a ese pequeño altar de madera que estaba siendo construido por una mujer con su bebé, y que iba poniendo poco a poco los objetos, las fotos, los velones, una botella de aguardiente, etcétera, etcétera. Y mientras iban pasando otras personas y seguían tomando fotos, yo sentí que allí había como algo en relación a lo cual yo no sabía qué hacer, que convocaba al mismo tiempo mi reserva, porque de algún modo me quería poner en la misma onda en la que yo sentía que estaba la persona que estaba allí. Y es justamente ese temblor, es justamente esa ambigüedad, es justamente ese no saber qué hacer, pero sentir que estamos haciendo algo, que podemos hacerlo, de lo que, en mi opinión, se trata, y que yo logré como enriquecimiento en esta experiencia sensible a la cual Patricia y su team nos convocaron. Gracias.
Well, it is time, but you're all invited to stay and talk a little bit more. I want to thank again our COPR team, researchers, and all of you who came today to listen to these moments, to listen to these expressions, and to take something with it, right? Take something with you, and maybe next time, next year around, we'll convene a bigger group, a different purpose, right? To do these visits, to do the kinds of engaged experiences that your colleague was talking back there about a different type of maintenance and preservation. I want to thank our wonderful translator and interpreter today, Sylvia. Thank you for being with us. To our wonderful guests from France, thank you for coming and spending time with us. And if there are any questions, please, stay for a little bit. We're going to be here till about 15 minutes or so. And we also, Lucio, do we have some little things out there, munchies? We can also continue our conversation there. Some snacks before lunch. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you.